I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam a door. I just stood there in my own kitchen, the one I'd tiled myself 31 years ago with my own two hands, and I listened to my son's wife tell me I had 2 weeks to find somewhere else to live. 2 weeks. I remember looking down at my coffee mug. It was the old blue one with the chip on the handle. I'd been meaning to throw it out for years. I remember thinking, very clearly, that I was going to take that mug with me when I left. Not because I needed it, just because it was mine. My name is Arthur Calloway. I'm 63 years old. I spent 35 years as an electrician in Sudbury, Ontario, working mostly commercial hospitals, schools, the odd mine site when the money was good. I retired early, not because I had to, but because I'd been careful. Very careful. The kind of careful that doesn't look like much from the outside. My son Liam is 31. He's a good-looking boy. Always was. He got his mother's jaw and her way of walking into a room like he expected something from it. His mother passed 11 years ago. Breast cancer, 18 months from diagnosis to the end. After that, it was just the two of us, in the house on Ramsey Lake Road that she and I had bought in 1998 for $240,000, and that was now worth, according to the last assessment, just under $1.4 million. Liam met Courtney at a work conference in Toronto 3 years ago. She's from Oakville. Her father is a portfolio manager downtown. Her mother runs some kind of wellness business. They're the kind of people who say cottage, but mean a 5-bedroom property on Georgian Bay with a boathouse. When Liam brought her home for the first time, she looked around the living room, at the wood stove, the bookshelves, the old plaid sofa, and smiled the way people smile when they're being polite about something they find disappointing. I noticed. I didn't say anything. They got engaged last spring and moved in with me while they saved for a house. That was the arrangement. 6 months, maybe 8. I told Liam to take his time. The house was big enough. I liked having him around. What I didn't understand, what I was slow to see, was how quickly, staying here temporarily, became this is ours now. It started small. Courtney rearranged the kitchen. Then she had the living room repainted. A gray so dark it made the room feel like the inside of a filing cabinet. She put my mother's ceramic lamp in the garage because it didn't, and I'm quoting here, work with the new direction. I found it there 2 weeks later, wrapped in a garbage bag, sitting next to the snowblower. My mother brought that lamp from Scotland in 1971. It was one of the only things I had left of her. I didn't argue. I brought the lamp upstairs and put it in my bedroom. But the repainting, the rearranging, that wasn't the thing that changed everything. What changed everything was a Sunday dinner in late October, about 4 months after they moved in. Courtney's parents drove up from Oakville. Her father, the portfolio manager, wore a blazer to dinner at my house. Not that there's anything wrong with that. He ordered a specific type of sparkling water when he arrived, which I didn't have, and didn't seem to register that asking for something a person doesn't have in their own house is a peculiar thing to do when you're the guest. I made lake trout. I'd caught it myself the previous weekend, out on Ramsey with my old canoe and a rod I've had since my 30s. I'm not a bad cook. My wife taught me well. Courtney's father asked, somewhere around the second glass of wine, what I was planning to do about the property. I said I wasn't planning to do anything about it. I lived there. He nodded slowly, the way people do when they think you've missed something obvious. He said that in a market like this, sitting on an unoptimized asset was a significant opportunity cost. He said Liam and Courtney were at a stage in their lives where they needed stability. He said that a property like this, in the hands of someone who could develop its potential, could be the foundation of a real future. I looked at Liam. He was looking at his plate. I said, interesting perspective, and then I asked if anyone wanted more fish. But that dinner was the beginning of something. I could feel it, the way you feel a change in pressure before a storm comes in off the lake. The next 2 months, the conversations got less subtle. Courtney started talking about renovations, not small ones. A full second-floor addition, a new dock, converting the basement into a suite to rent on Airbnb. She showed me floor plans on her iPad one evening. Actual floor plans, drawn up by an actual architect. I asked who had commissioned those. She said her father knew someone, and it hadn't cost anything, And wasn't it exciting to think about what this place could become? I said I'd think about it. I thought about it. What I thought was that a 31-year-old woman who had lived in my house for 4 months had hired an architect to redesign it without asking me. What I thought was that nobody in this conversation seemed to remember whose name was on the deed. The conversation I keep coming back to happened on a Tuesday morning, November. Cold enough that there was ice on the dock. I was having breakfast when Courtney came downstairs in her work clothes, poured herself a coffee, and said, without looking up, that she and Liam had been talking and they thought it would make more sense, logistically, if I moved into the coach house. We have a small coach house at the back of the property. It's maybe 400 square feet. I used it as a workshop. It has heat and plumbing, but no proper kitchen. Just a bar fridge and a microwave I'd put out there for when I worked late. She said they could fix it up. Make it nice. She said I'd probably find it easier, honestly. Just the one level, no stairs. She said it like she was doing me a favor. I was 63, not 83. The stairs were fine. I'd put down my fork. I looked at her for a long moment. I said, "I'll think about it." She smiled and left for work. I sat at that kitchen table, the same table where my wife and I had done homework with Liam when he was 7, where I'd signed the papers for my first investment property, where I'd eaten breakfast alone for 6 months after my wife died because I couldn't figure out how to change any of the routines we'd built together. And I thought about what it meant that a person could stand in your house and tell you to move to the shed. Then I drove downtown to see my lawyer. Her name is Deborah, and she's been handling my affairs for 12 years. She's from the Sault originally, sharp as anything. And she has a way of listening to you that makes you feel like she already knows where the story is going. I told her everything. The floor plans, the coach house conversation, the lamp in the garbage bag. She didn't say much until I was done. Then she said, "Arthur, what exactly do they know about your finances?" I told her they knew about my pension. They knew I'd had some investments. They thought, roughly, that I was comfortable but not significantly wealthy. I had never seen any reason to tell Liam the specifics, not because I was hiding anything, because money conversations do something to people, and I'd watched it happen in other families, and I'd always believed it was better to let my actions speak when the time came. Deborah nodded. She asked if I'd like to talk through some options. We talked for 2 hours. By the time I left her office, I had a plan. It was not a complicated plan. It did not involve shouting or confrontation or any of the things that would have made me feel temporarily better and permanently worse. It involved 3 phone calls and a significant amount of paperwork. The first call was to my real estate agent. I told her I wanted to list the house on Ramsey Lake Road. She asked if I were sure. I told her I'd never been more sure of anything in my professional life, and she laughed because she thought I was joking. And then she went quiet when she realized I wasn't. The second call was to a property management company in North Bay that handled a portfolio I'd been quietly building for the past 18 years. 16 residential properties across northeastern Ontario. Nothing flashy, mostly older homes in Sudbury, Timmins, New Liskeard, kept up well and rented to working families at fair rates. The kind of investment that doesn't make the news but compounds quietly over decades. The kind of thing that turns a careful electrician's salary into something that would have surprised most people who knew me. The third call was to my financial advisor in Toronto. I needed to move some things around, to structure what I owned in a way that would be clean and clear and entirely mine. Then I drove home and made dinner. I didn't tell Liam and Courtney that night. I didn't tell them the next night either. I went about my life the way I always had, up at 6. Coffee by the lake when it wasn't too cold, into the workshop in the afternoon. I was perfectly pleasant. I helped Courtney carry groceries in from the car one evening. I watched hockey with Liam on the Saturday. Things were normal. Or they seemed normal. The listing went live on a Thursday. I know exactly what time because I was watching. 9:17 in the morning. By 10 o'clock, my phone had 17 notifications from real estate apps, and my agent had called twice with showing requests. Liam saw it first. He called me from work at 11, voice very careful, asking if I knew that our house was listed on MLS. I said yes, I did know that. Silence. He said, "Dad, what's going on?" I said, I'll explain tonight, don't worry. He arrived home before Courtney that evening. We sat in the kitchen, at the table, and I talked, and he listened. I told him I loved him. I told him that had never been in question and would never be in question. I told him that I had spent my whole adult life building something so that he would never have to start from nothing, and that I had watched, over the past 4 months, the place I had built that something from being treated like a property development opportunity. I said, nobody tells me to move to the workshop in my own home. He didn't say anything for a long moment. He was looking at the table. He said, I didn't know she was going to say that. I told him I believed him. I did believe him. Liam wasn't a cruel person. He was a person who had fallen in love with a woman whose vision for the future didn't leave much room for an aging father-in-law who wore the same flannel jacket he'd owned since 2003. When Courtney got home, the conversation was different. She was not quiet. She said I was being irrational. She said the listing was an overreaction. She said her parents had only been trying to help, that the floor plans were just ideas, that the coach house conversation had been a suggestion made with kindness. I listened to all of it. I waited until she was finished. Then I said, I've heard your perspective, and I appreciate you sharing it. She stared at me. I said, the house is sold. My lawyer will handle the paperwork. You have 90 days, which is more than generous. She said, you can't do this. I said, I own the house. I've owned it since 1998. I can do exactly this. Then I went upstairs and read until I fell asleep. They left 4 weeks before the 90 days were up. I didn't ask where they went. I assumed Oakville, her parents' place. Liam texted me the day they left. Just, we're gone. I texted back, I know. I love you. Call me when you're ready. He didn't call for 6 weeks. The house sold in 9 days for $1.38 million. Conditions waived, closing in 60 days. My agent said it was one of the cleanest sales she'd done all year. I bought a smaller place on the same lake. 2 bedrooms, good bones, a dock. I rebuilt myself over the spring. It's quiet in the mornings in a way the big house never quite was. I sit with my coffee and watch the light come across the water, and I feel, more often than not, like myself. What Liam and Courtney hadn't known, what I had never discussed at a dinner table, never mentioned to anyone who hadn't needed to know, was the full picture. The 16 properties in the north, generating combined rental income of around $22,000 a month, the RRSP and TFSA accounts I'd maxed out every year since my early 30s, the non-registered investment accounts I'd built with the patience of someone who understood that time in the market mattered more than anything else. When Deborah laid it all out in one document that spring, for estate planning purposes she'd said, which was true, but also felt timely, the number was significant. Not tech executive significant, but for a man who had fixed wiring in other people's buildings for 35 years and driven the same truck for 11. It was more than anyone looking at me would have guessed. I tell you this not to impress anyone. I tell you this because Courtney had sat across from me at my own table and decided, based on how I looked and what I kept in my cupboards, that I was an obstacle rather than a person, that I was something to be managed and eventually relocated. She had no idea. That's the part that still surprises me sometimes, sitting on my new dock in the morning. Not that she wanted what I had. People want things. That's human. What surprises me is how certain she was about what I was worth, without ever once asking. Liam called on a Wednesday in February. We talked for almost 2 hours. He cried, which I hadn't expected, and I let him, which was the right thing to do. He said he was sorry. He said he'd let things happen that he should have stopped. He said he'd spent 6 weeks at his in-laws and started seeing, from close range, how that household operated, and it had clarified some things for him. I asked how he and Courtney were doing. He was quiet for a moment, then he said they were taking some time apart. I said, I'm sorry to hear that. I meant it. He came up to Sudbury in March. I picked him up at the station and we drove to the new house, and I made lake trout the same way I'd made it that Sunday dinner 18 months earlier. We ate at a smaller table. The lamb from Scotland was on the sideboard. Liam looked at it for a moment and said, I forgot you had that. I said I kept it. He nodded. He asked if he could stay for a few days. I said, of course you can. It's your home, too, as long as you want it. We played cribbage after dinner, the way we used to when he was a kid. I let him win the first game. He knew I let him win, the way he always did, and he didn't say anything about it, the way he never did. And it was fine. It was more than fine. It was exactly what I'd hoped for when I thought about it honestly. Not revenge, not victory, just my son at my table. A lamp that made it across an ocean in 1971, and a lake that looked the same in the morning as it always had. I didn't need him to understand everything, I just needed him to come back. He did. I still think about that Tuesday morning sometimes. The ice on the dock, the coffee going cold, Courtney pouring herself a cup in my kitchen and telling me, without looking up, that the workshop might suit me better. There's something clarifying about a moment like that. Not painful, exactly, or not only painful. Clarifying. Because it showed me, very plainly, what happens when a person mistakes patience for weakness and quietness for having nothing left. I'd spent 35 years doing work that people don't think much about until something stops working. Wiring. The stuff inside the walls. Nobody sees it, nobody thinks about it, and when it's done right, nobody ever has to. That's the nature of it. You build things that hold quietly for decades. I'd applied the same thinking to everything else. The properties, the accounts, the slow and deliberate accumulation of something that looked like very little from the outside and was, in fact, substantial. What Courtney saw when she looked at me was a man in a flannel jacket driving an 11-year-old truck. She made a calculation based on appearances, and she was wrong, and the consequences of being wrong followed naturally from the wrongness itself. That's not a punishment I designed. It's just what happens when you build your assumptions on something that isn't true. But here's what I've sat with longer than the legal outcomes. Longer than the sale of the house or the satisfaction of watching a listing go live on a Thursday morning. The question of what I did well and what I could have done differently. I think I was right to be private about money. I still believe that. I've seen what early inheritance conversations do to families, and it rarely brings out the best in anyone. But I wonder sometimes if I was private in a way that left Liam without the tools he needed, not the money, the understanding of how it's built. The discipline of it. The willingness to delay, to save, to treat patience not as something you endure, but as something you practice on purpose, because you understand that the things worth having take time. I didn't teach him that explicitly. I showed it by example, but I never named it, and there's a difference. What I've come to believe, and I'm 63, so I have the right to believe things with some conviction, is that the most important thing you can give someone isn't money or property. It's a clear sense of what's right to do, even when it costs you something. Liam came back to me in March, not because I had assets or because I'd won some dispute. He came back because, somewhere underneath everything that had happened, he knew I'd acted with integrity. He knew I hadn't done anything that wasn't mine to do. You can lose a lot of things. You can't lose that if you've genuinely built it. The lamp from Scotland is on the sideboard in the new house. My wife's mother brought it over in a suitcase in 1971, which means it survived an Atlantic crossing, 40 years of a Sudbury winter, and one garage in a garbage bag. It's not fragile, it just looks like it might be. I think about that sometimes when I'm out on the dock in the morning. The things that last aren't always the ones that announce themselves. Most of what holds is invisible, right up until someone tests it. Mine held. That's enough for me.